All right, we're visible on camera. Welcome to today's Emerging Technologies panel, Spatial Computing Industry Outlook. Before we get into a discussion with our panelists, I would like to take an opportunity to provide an overview of the Alan B. Levan NSU Broward Center of Innovation. My name is John Wensveen, and I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Nova Southeastern University and Executive Director of the Alan B. Levan NSU Broward Center of Innovation. The Levan Center is a public-private partnership between Nova Southeastern University and Broward County. We are building an economic and education development engine that is an opportunity gateway for Greater Fort Lauderdale, Broward County, and South Florida with local, regional, national, and international impact. One of our goals is to better link the South Florida innovation ecosystem by offering customized programs, events, and wraparound services to support the founder's journey from birth of an idea through successful exit of a company. Our three themes include innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship. Our four pillars are ideate, incubate, accelerate, and post-accelerate. Our six outcomes include breakthrough ideation, new technologies, talent skills pipeline, new jobs, company formation, and the scaling of early stage and young startup companies. We are launching a purpose-built 54,000 square foot facility in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, now under construction, and we look forward to opening this summer. Details of our progress can be found on our website at nova.edu/innovation. We are in an age of acceleration and mega disruption. Some say the future is tomorrow, and some say the future is already here. When we envision the cities, structures, systems, and manufacturing of the future, it's tempting to picture our world, well, running itself. Will we need work? Will there be jobs? The answer is yes to both, I think. The way in which humans work and live is changing, and all will continue to change at a pace beyond our comprehension. The words spatial computing might be new to many, but in 2003, it was defined by Simon Greenwald, who at the time was a graduate student at the Media Lab at MIT, as human interaction with a machine, in which the machine retains and manipulates reference to real objects and spaces. Spatial computing has been described as the next big thing, beyond virtual and augmented reality. It does everything virtual reality and augmented reality apps do. Then it combines these capabilities with high-fidelity spatial mapping to enable a computer coordinator to track and control the movements and interactions of objects as a person navigates through the digital or physical world. Spatial computing has experienced a chain reaction of start activity, tech giant investment, and VC inflows. Spatial computing will soon bring human-machine and machine-machine interactions to new levels of efficiency in many walks of life, among them industry, healthcare, transportation, and the home. Major companies, including Microsoft and Amazon, are heavily invested in this technology. I'm so excited to introduce today's panel representing a diverse and global perspective on the application of spatial computing. Welcome Jennifer Shannon from Galvanize, joining us from New York, Thomas Lewis from Microsoft, joining us from Greater Seattle, Callie Leone from Eunoe, from New York, but currently visiting with us here in South Florida, and Jeremy Dalton from PwC, joining us all the way from across the pond in London, and Rob Petrosino from PeakActivity, joining us from South Florida. Panelists, as we transition to the questions, feel free to introduce yourself, your organization, and your role as a change maker in the innovation ecosystem, and I encourage you not to be shy. As we proceed into the questions, we'll start with question number one, and Jennifer, I'll ask you to respond, followed by Thomas, and then we'll go to Callie, Jeremy, and Rob. I'd like to open the discussion by asking each of you to define spatial computing from your company's perspective, and what are the global trends that we're experiencing with spatial computing? So Jennifer, I'll turn it over to you to lead the way.
All right, thank you, John. Very excited to be here today. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Jennifer Shannon, and I am the Alliance Director for Galvanize. Galvanize is a tech education company. We focus on upskilling and reskilling. We focus on software engineering and data science and emerging trends. And personally, have a background in spatial computing from ages ago for spatial computing in graduate school. But our company, as Galvanize, we're seeing a transition from spatial computing going from an emerging trend into an actual implementation. And I think that's where we're most excited. For many years, we go into companies and it's like, look at this headset. This is a thing you can do. And there's a hands-on workshop to learn how XR foundations and learn about headsets. What we're really excited about is integrating spatial computing into existing technologies, cloud computing, machine learning. So all of the trainings that we provide, we're starting to see our clients and partners reach out for specific spatial computing. And the global trends we're seeing are an increase in interest due to 5G networks increasing, advances in hardware, and digital transformations at scale. I'll pass the question over to Thomas.
Hi, everyone. My name is Thomas Lewis. I work for Microsoft in our developer relations group. I lead a good set of folks who are advocates for spatial computing. And, I always have said that spatial computing to me is the intersection of people and places and things in a digital world. I think that when you think of spatial computing, those three things are just a part of everything. I think it's a very unusual to find a spatial computing project that doesn't include those three. And a lot of times when we're talking to folks who are trying to solve problems, where they usually fall is one of those three that they haven't really thought about, those interactions and those engagements. And I definitely agree with Jennifer, some of the global things that are happening, because there's a couple of things that come to mind for me. One is COVID. I think that COVID really made us have to rethink just about everything we do. But what was kind of interesting was it made us rethink about the concept of where. Right? Because I think before we always used to think about, well, it's going to be either headquarters or the regional office, or we're going to have open spaces, or we're going to have offices. And now we're starting to kind of question ourselves and go, do we need offices? Do we need headquarters? What are the spaces that are digital that we can all go to have those communications? And with the immersive technologies that you have in spatial, you don't lose the things that people would say, well, it's not the same, having a meeting. I've been in some of those interesting immersive meetings, and they're really exciting. And then I would say the second thing is climate change. I think we all have no doubt that climate change is very real, and that we need to start doing things today for a better tomorrow. And so what's happened is it's made us reconsider like jumping on airplanes for a power meeting, right? Because now we can actually meet either digitally, immersively, no matter where we are in the world.
So I'm a little jealous of all the toys you have sitting on your right side there in your room, but you're absolutely right. And one of the great things that I think we've learned, and this is a perfect example, is here we are connecting the east and west coast of the United States up with the United Kingdom today, which we could have done before, but I think we're much more aware and our ability to diversify our geographic footprint and bringing people like you all together to have these great conversations. So we're definitely rethinking how the world's going to look, and I'm so excited about the future of spatial computing and how it fits into that. And so excited. So with that said, we'll turn it over to Callie for your commentary.
So definitely want to continue this chain reaction that Jennifer kicked off and Thomas continued on with all of these very important trends that are happening going on with spatial computing. So I am taking the startup perspective here on the panel today. My name is Callie Leone. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Eunoe. And we are actually looking at spatial computing beyond what we see in terms of physical spaces in the world. We're looking at it in terms of mental space and cognitive space, because we realize that not only do we travel physically in the world, but we also do mental time travel. And what COVID has really brought into the forefront is how stressed and challenged we really are dealing with everything in our personal lives, our professional lives, and we're looking at the intersection of healthcare, education, and training in spatial computing, which combines physical, emotional, cognitive, and all the different technologies that we're really seeing in the space. So I'm really excited to kind of share our journey about what we're working on, and it's really an exciting time to be in spatial computing. I think there's a lot of things going on, and what Thomas really touched on, that spatial computing makes possible is something called presence, which other technologies, whether it's web or mobile, really struggle with. Is we have this passive consumption that we're experiencing in traditional content right now. And spatial computing makes it possible for us to be directly engaged in an experience that it's really revolutionizing every sector, from healthcare to training to entertainment. So really excited to talk about that here with everyone today. And I will pass it over, I think, to Rob.
Rob or Jeremy, we'll go with you, Rob, since you've been put
or
on the
Jeremy.
spot. Go.
Sorry,
okay.
did I put Rob on the spot?
It doesn't matter. Let Rob. We'll put Rob on the spot. See how he goes.
Shaking things up. Sorry, everybody.
No worries. So Rob Petrosino, VP of Emerging Tech and Innovation at PeakActivity, which is a digital transformation and acceleration company based out of South Florida. So our core audiences or industries that we work with is everything from retail to healthcare. That could be e-commerce platforms down to VR, AR, and machine learning, which is where I reside and run the department for. As far as trends of what we've seen a rapid adoption from both users and industries. So industries are actually understanding now the value of having AR and spatial computing, as well as VR for everything, like everyone else said on this call, which is training to customer confidence in a purchase. We've really seen it spiral from being a marketing tool that was very interesting on social media to get pushed all the way back to HR and back of the house workers type of experiences. So it's been really interesting. COVID has shifted slightly, I think, where we were looking at a lot of head-mounted displays, and now personal device AR is kind of pushing. So when you think of like WebXR, there's that dynamic push and pull. So those are the things that we're seeing overall. And as everyone else, I'm super excited to be here, and I'm really happy to be chatting with you guys today. Jeremy, I will kick it to you.
Cheers. Many thanks for that, Rob. Hi, everyone. My name is Jeremy Dalton, and I take care of the XR team at PwC in the UK. And I'm also the author of a book called Reality Check, which is designed to help people all over the world understand virtual reality and augmented reality technology better. At PwC, we're all about trying to help clients in different industries not only understand the technology, but also to implement it successfully and to create some sort of value in their businesses from. I think there is a misconception, and sadly this is a bit of a trend, but hopefully a declining trend, that there is this misunderstanding that virtual reality and augmented reality is all about gaming and entertainment. Now, I say this as a video gamer myself, so I have nothing against it at all. In fact, I'm very, very pro gaming, but this vision that business leaders or a lot of business leaders have around virtual reality or augmented reality, spatial computing as a kind of lazy umbrella term for the two, is slightly disheartening, because it doesn't provide enough context for how much these technologies can help in businesses. And we've heard from all the panelists here just now around the wide range of applications, and they go from training to virtual collaboration to sales and marketing to operations and visualization of assets and environments and design of those assets and environments all over the world. It's such an incredibly amazing space. And in terms of this convergence point, I think Jennifer mentioned initially, it's absolutely imperative that we get most of the value from this technology by connecting it to these other emerging technologies, but also to remember that virtual reality and augmented reality are very unique in that they are very front-end facing technologies. They're very visual, experiential, and as a result, they really need to be experienced firsthand to be well understood.
Great. Thank you for that, Jeremy. I appreciate that. I'm going to come back and touch on a couple of things that you mentioned in some later questions that I think are going to be really interesting in terms of our discussion. Now that we've addressed some of the main global trends that are occurring, I'd like to focus more on the challenges that we're facing in the world of spatial computing technology as it evolves. And Thomas, if I could have you lead that off.
Yeah. When I think of the challenges, the technology, I've always said, like, you can write enough code, and with enough time, you can pretty much solve any technical problems. The challenges usually come on the people part of the equation, in that we need to think about a couple of things. One is around inclusion. I think a lot of what we see today is very directed at people who are well off, highly educated, highly connected, high disposable income as our target audience. And not to say that that's necessarily a bad thing, but it's a trend that it shows a little bit of concern, right? Because when we aren't being inclusive, we're losing out on not only a very large opportunity, but the ability to build something for everyone. And I think this is something we all want, right? We all, when we got into this, we believe in this concept of there being a metaverse and this thing helping people. And so we have to kind of think about, hey, are the things that we're doing being inclusive or not? And it's very easy sort of in a disruption kind of market and environment to be like, well, you know, I'm really focused on just getting these folks in because they've got the money to support, you know, these other folks, you know, the long tail, we don't have to think about until maybe much later on. And we need to kind of bring those folks first, because once you focus on them, you also focus on that smaller niche audience at the same time. The other thing that I'm a little bit concerned with, and Jeremy, you know, kind of touched a bit on the gaming thing, is that we need to build out talent. And unfortunately, right now, we're pulling a lot of folks out of the gaming industry because they're the ones who have the skill sets. And unfortunately, one, this isn't sustainable, right? We can't just keep pulling out of one industry to feed another. The other thing is that we will, you know, inherently bring in the bad things as well. Not saying that the game industry is this, you know, evil empire, but we have things that we have to deal with, like, you know, work overload, which is, you know, very notoriously known for in the game industry. Things like misogyny, trollism, and all of those things. And the problem is that, you know, you can't just say, well, keep all that at the door, but you can come in. It's something that we have to sort of address and together say, hey, this is something that we're not going to accept. And so I think thinking about inclusion, thinking about how we build out that talent is incredibly important as we think of the challenges going forward.
Great, and I'm glad you brought up inclusion and talent as well. I have a question coming up very shortly that addresses talent, and we'll see where that one goes. I have my own opinions of talent versus skilled, qualified talent, but we'll address that momentarily. Jennifer, would you like to take this question in terms of what the challenges are?
Thank you. And Thomas, I love your answer, and we just want to piggyback on it. Talent and inclusion. I think training is going to be very crucial to fill a skills gap, and thinking about inclusion. There are, and I can talk about this later, but there are so many programs and workforce programs, particularly right now with COVID affecting a lot of industries. I think we can create a workforce using training for geospatial analytics, data science, machine learning, and really tap kind of new talent and making sure that it's diverse. That's really important. Yeah, that's, I'll pass it off to, I don't know if there's an order, who's next.
Well, we'll go to East London and have Jeremy take this one.
I'd be delighted. So my view on this is that there are four main challenges to contend with to really drive this technology forward. And that is around cost, content, education, and experience. Cost is fairly self-explanatory. In order to get this into as many consumer hands as possible, and we're kind of talking about two markets here. We're talking about business to consumer and business to business at the same time. And each of those markets have varying, they're different in terms of the amount, the effect that they'll have from these challenges. But cost is something that affects both of those markets. Then when it comes to content, the availability of quality content, you need that to drive a spatial computing market and to make sure that there is something there for people to use rather than having to develop things from scratch, which comes with a lot of friction. The next big area is around education. And this is similar to what I was saying before, this lack of understanding of the true potential of the technology. And this certainly needs to change to get people and businesses to adopt the technology in droves and greater numbers. And then finally, the experience around the technology. This is something that everybody who's put on a VR or AR headset will probably agree with. You ideally want to have something that you're wearing on your face. You want it to be light. You want it to be small. Ideally invisible. We would want to get the technology to a point where you don't even realize it's technology that you're wearing. And then finally, on that kind of note, the ease of use or the intuitiveness with which you can do what you need to do with the technology, that still has to be worked through, but it's understandable. We're moving from computer mice and keyboards and touchscreens to completely new modalities of working and interfacing with digital technology, now including voice recognition, hand tracking, eye tracking, and being able to actually look around an environment physically rather than using a proxy like dragging your mouse or your finger across a screen to change the view. So all of that is going to result in an evolution and uptake of this technology that is not going to be overnight. It's going to take some time, but the beautiful thing is all of these challenges are being addressed each and every day, and they're becoming smaller and smaller issues. And we're starting to see that uptake happen at a nice, steady pace, despite the impatience of society and wanting to push that to an exponential jump. But the good thing is we've got an uptick there at least.
Great, thanks. Appreciate that, Jeremy. So let's bring it back to South Florida. We'll go to Rob and then Callie. And interestingly, when we talk about South Florida, there's a new line out there that I think the world's finding very interesting. There are more and more opportunities to live in the sun and work in the cloud as South Florida's innovation ecosystem begins to expand. So hopefully we see more spatial computing activity. So Rob will get away, you'll take off, and then Callie, you can have the closing comments on the associated challenges.
So I think that everyone's touched on fantastic points so far. I think a lot of the ones that we're hovering around is this idea of talent, and talent really comes down to the fact that what we're doing across the board in everyone's company is something that isn't Googleable. We can't go to GitHub and pull up a repo that someone's already done this before. So when we talk about training and onset of talent, it'd be great if they had every single skill set underneath the sun. But for us at PeakActivity, it really comes down to a lot of heart versus head. You can have as much technical understanding as you want, but if your heart isn't in it, is there any empathy for the user and the experience that they're going through? Is that really going to be the best thing? And is it going to drive you to work harder to actually develop something that's brand new, that is an emerging technology? So that's one of the major ones for us. And also what I've seen a lot of over the last 8 months, the last year, the last 5 years is the speed of change. We went from tethered units to untethered units in under a year. We're now looking at the potential of having contact lenses with head-mounted displays where you can wear connected to your cell phone. So there's a rapid speed of change that's happening. Keeping up with that and making sure that there's valid use cases for whoever the consumer or whoever the user is going to be. I think that's a huge part of it as well that we didn't touch on to back everyone else up. But Callie, I'll kick it to you.
I love what you just said, Rob, because, everyone pointed out really amazing things, but we've seen this massive shift in where we are in spatial computing, where we've got headsets that are much more cheaper and accessible. We've got all the pieces in place for this to take off right now. But what we do need are really clear use cases that are going to drive ROI for the all intended stakeholders, which not only means those in the C-suite, but it also means the end users. And that doesn't happen without proper collaboration and empathy and understanding for what the process is that you're trying to solve in, whether it's a virtual environment, an augmented environment, some kind of mixed environment. And that is a really important part of the process that's often left out and very connected to the talent gap that Jennifer, you really pointed out here. Because when you're pulling, and Thomas, you really touched on this with the gaming industry, when you're pulling talent from only one sector, they take the skills that they know, but they don't have the experience or the understanding of what the other collaborators or stakeholders need in order to create a viable solution. And that's usually what is going to drive adoption from a B2B perspective. And The second thing that I think we really need to address that's going to drive consumer adoption that ties into gaming as well is this brand perception. VR is not just a gaming technology, and a lot of the games that are coming out are phenomenal, but they're very siloed and they're very similar to one another. So when you need new experiential content, you have to appeal to a wider variety of audience that can pull people in and then also compete with 2D games. So you really have to look at what is going to be novel and genuine about spatial computing. And I think one thing that I'd like to add to this as a closing part of the challenge is that spatial computing offers us a very human approach to technology, much more so than 2D has allowed us to do. And we've been trained how to remove humanity from technology in order to make it, fast, make it easy, make it simple. And we have to redesign that part back into a full experiential economy as we move forward. So I'm really excited to be part of that and talk about that on the rest of this panel.
So thanks, Callie. I appreciate the word heart, and I think there's a lot of importance behind that. And again, another trend comes back to talent, which I'll address in another question and get your insights into what the future looks like. But now that we've addressed some of the trends and the challenges, I'd like to focus on what I would call the opportunities and strategies. And what I do when I'm looking at panels or research is I always look at trends, challenges, opportunities, and strategies, because I think it puts the whole equation together. So as we look at trends and challenges and move into the opportunities and strategies sections of our discussion, what are the opportunities that are associated with spatial computing now and in the future? And what types of strategies are being developed to fully captivate the ROI spatial computing technology provides? And Jennifer, if you could lead that off.
I did it. Thank you. I thought
I'm not going to say you're on mute. Now I'm tired.
I caught it. I think we're seeing a lot of opportunities, and I'm bringing it back to training. That's the space that we're most familiar with. But we're seeing our partners and clients in manufacturing and industrial sector, media and telecommunications, which is, I think, the most obvious one. But it's the companies that we work with who are doing digital transformations to the cloud and are thinking, oh, well, we should be doing spatial computing as well. And I think this is very exciting because they're developing internal training and innovation centers where they're doing data science, they're doing software engineering, they're doing cloud, but they're also looking at spatial computing. They're looking at AR and VR, and whether the end user is an internal employee, which would be manufacturing, mostly what we're seeing in manufacturing and industrial sector partners, or the end user is a client or customer for media and telecommunications. I think there are some really exciting opportunities in this, like taking an emerging trend into an implementation in large scale enterprises. So I pass it off to Thomas.
Thank you. Like Jennifer said, there's some things that are happening like today, and there's sort of like how we're kind of envisioning tomorrow. And today, absolutely, skilling, education, simulation, those are things that are just, when I talk to our partners who do a lot of this work, that's kind of the bulk of their work, because it is a very natural progression of like, hey, what we want to do is if someone is on a factory floor, we don't want to have to train them by yelling in their ear, when they might be wearing, earplugs or things like that. It's much easier to have a device that says, hey, grab this part here, and it's actually, highlighting there's where the part is. And then how do you put it into an engine or some kind of thing? And so I think that, that's going to just continue to grow and expand. I think that that's one of those where we're just going to be like, of course. Education, it is huge. I'm on a Discord server called Educators in VR, and it's VR, AR research, all kinds of good stuff. And it is just nonstop amazing what these educators have been able to do, even when they don't have all the tools and they are just learning. I'm always excited, and we always are trying to jump in and go, hey, how can we help, these folks, because they're doing amazing things with, limited knowledge and limited resources. And again, in a, COVID type of situation. When we think about kind of the future, when we talk to customers or communities or developers, what we try to do is to get them to ask themselves some questions. So for example, where are you challenged by physics, right? Because the wonderful thing about spatial computing is physics kind of doesn't matter, right? If we're like, hey, what's it like to be without gravity? We can simulate not having gravity. So things like changing the design of a car, for example, that's something that can be easily done. It's something that is fairly expensive. So if you've ever seen a car being designed, they usually create these models and, they're made out of clay, and someone goes in and, we'll say, oh, well, let's make this a little more aerodynamic. So someone goes in there with a shaver, shaves it off. If they shave off too much, okay, well, we now need to spend another $100,000 to get a new clay model in here. Whereas, of course, virtually what we can do is we can change it, 1,000 times, and we don't lose out on anything, and we actually save a lot of money for that. And then the other question we'll ask is, are there situations where space requirements make things difficult? And so you can imagine things like airplanes, right? Where if you want to sort of design an airplane, you have to have a very big hangar for that. Whereas now what we can do is we can say, well, I want to look at the airplane engine right in front of me, and it can be this very small but very immersive thing. Or I can say, well, what does the size of the engine look like in real life? And in my office, I can expand it as big as it actually is required. So I think we've got a lot of great opportunities today. And I think that, those things will continue. And then in the future, we just have a lot of these things that we're going to be able to do that, honestly, we just never really thought we could do before.
Great, appreciate it. And I love the reference to airplanes. I'm a big aviation guy. That's my background in terms of industry, and I've seen it firsthand when you show somebody a textbook and an engine versus an engine through a wearable technology. It puts it in a whole new light. I've seen this being used in pilot training, and it's absolutely amazing in terms of what the ROI is when you can actually be in the environment and hands-on doing, if you will. So this is great discussion, and I love it. And Callie, I'd like to kick that over to you to talk about the opportunities and the strategies that we see now and for the future.
Sure. So, training is obviously huge, and it not only is about training in terms of an industrial training or workforce training. What we're seeing in the healthcare space is you're training doctors. What we've seen in the pandemic, you've done incredible trainings on teaching people how to do vaccinations, teaching people how to do basic hygiene and improve the delivery mechanisms of so much of the aspects of healthcare delivery. It's been phenomenal. So physician training has been huge. That's one thing that's phenomenal. There's another aspect of spatial computing that when you look at the health and wellness space, you're looking at its huge potential for pain management. You're looking at this as a potential to treat PTSD, to treat anxiety, to really help people from a mental health and wellness standpoint that has really untold potential for how people can simulate experiences that would be very difficult to either replicate or practice in the real world. So when you're talking about confronting fears, confronting phobias, whether that's having a difficult conversation with your boss, or you're maybe afraid of spiders, there are significant advances in this field. So spatial computing doesn't just have to be about going some physical place. It can have a mental representation and have sort of metaphorical experiences tied to it as well. So a lot of the training that we're working on is mental training and helping people use their, now I'm like tripping over my own voice, which is exactly what we're using. We're using voice technology because that actually helps you build new neural pathways to train your brain to understand the world in a different way, which connects through collaboration. And that's something I'm really excited about from an accessibility standpoint, because it reaches people in ways that they might not be able to access the technology in the future. So we're really building for inclusive design. You're building for new audiences. And that's something I think we're really going to see some great things coming forward in the health and wellness side.
Another magical word there, accessibility. And I think that's a huge thing that is much more discussion to go around that point, but thank you for bringing that up. Jeremy, your thoughts on this?
So there are applications like training we spoke about, like visualization of assets and design of vehicles. Those applications all have outcomes when it comes to business. And it doesn't really matter what industry you're in, what type of business you're running. Generally, you're going to get excited by a number of levers, whether that is creating new revenue streams, saving costs, reducing the time you spend on processes from a learning and development perspective, specifically improving learner confidence and focus and retention of information, reducing the complexity of your operations, decreasing the number of accidents from a health and safety perspective, taking your products to market faster when you conduct design reviews in virtual reality. All of these areas and outcomes are going to be interesting to a lot of different businesses, and they can all be enabled by spatial computing technologies, which is absolutely amazing. When it comes to strategies and I'm thinking along the lines of strategies to implementing this technology, what we've seen is that businesses are generally reticent to engage with the technology because there are a number of perspectives, but some of them include the misunderstanding around what the technology can do. Some of them are around the belief that it's going to take a hell of a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort, and it's not going to be scalable enough. When the fact is that you can start with some really simple concepts like piloting spatial computing technology programs in a small way with an initial team in one of your offices in one part of the country. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing play with spatial computing. You can start small, invest a little bit of money to gain a lot of understanding. That business case that you will get as a result of making that small investment will put you in a really good position when it comes to taking that next step, whether it is pivoting elsewhere or investing further in widening out the use of the technology in the organization.
Great, appreciate that. Thank you very much, Jeremy. And Rob, you get the closing comments on this question.
Yeah, so to support what everyone said so far, the ones that we are looking at on a constant basis are time to productivity on the training side. So how quickly can we get someone up to speed, especially if it's a step and repeat task? What type of experience does that lend itself to? Obviously, reduction of cost, increased productivity. Everyone on the B2B side is looking for something along those lines. When we look at the B2C side, we really think of experience, retention, and completeness. So if they went through an experience, how long are they retaining that? A great use case, or one that I always talk about, is if you pulled up Instagram and you put a filter on your face and it was a branded filter, do you remember that experience? Or was it just so low on the experience scale that there wasn't really any retention overall? So those are the things that we talk about a lot with our customers as far as that goes. But when we think about, strategies moving forward, we always talk about MVPs, making sure this minimum viable product experience is driving to an end goal that you guys you as the company are looking to do, and ease of use and lowest barrier of entry. So what's the lowest barrier of entry that we can get as many people to have this experience as we can, and plant that experience and then move forward and scale up to the North Star goal, as we like to call it. And then ease of use, making sure the interactivity is there and it's very simple and understandable for anyone to pick up the device, whether it's head mounted or your iPad or cell phone, to make sure that experience is really easy. So to piggyback on what everyone else said, those are the ones that we look at.
Great. Thank you very much, Rob. This next question I'm going to aim specifically at Jennifer and Thomas. And I know we all want to talk about talent, but we'll have Jennifer and Thomas talk about this, and then we're going to transition into cybersecurity. But if you look at the need for skilled and qualified workers in the field of spatial computing, what does the future of work look like, and what do we as a society need to do now in order to best prepare for a sustainable workforce? And Jennifer, if you could lead off.
Okay. Thank you, John. Just repeating what Thomas had mentioned earlier, I think for a sustainable workforce, we really need an inclusive workforce. And I think we have an opportunity right now. I think the world is looking for us to make inclusive opportunities, bringing everyone into technology, and particularly emerging technologies. So I think that involves, I always bring it back to training. I'm an educator, I can't help it, but it's access to training as technology evolves, making sure these are inclusive environments, that this is such a fantastic technology to get your hands on visual storytelling, which is such a compelling lead into any technology, like being able to visualize something and see something. And on the back end of that is data, is spatial data. So I think it's, they're paving pathways for and targeting underrepresented individuals. There are some really exciting workforce opportunities coming forward with grant money. I think there are ways to create programs to lead individuals into careers in emerging technologies in fields that are growing, like AR, VR, and spatial computing, and particularly with COVID and a lot of what's happening in the world right now. So I would say the key to sustainable workforce is education and inclusion.
Great, I appreciate that. And Thomas, you want to take that off?
Yeah, and I would definitely plus one to all of the things that Jennifer said. I think those are critically important. One of the things I do like when you think about the future of work is that we're sort of taking common knowledge and sort of turning it on its head. So typically what people would say is, oh, make sure that you get the CXO, the latest toy. And we're actually seeing it differently now, where frontline workers are starting to get the best toys before the CXOs. And so, for example, we are seeing frontline workers on assembly lines getting these wonderful devices that, you know, sit on their head, let them see things digitally, let them interact with their real environment, you know, augmented by this, you know, virtual environment. And so it's something that I gravitate towards because, like I said, how often do we walk in to a place where there's frontline workers and they're still working on a Windows 95 box, right? So it's nice to see that they are getting the better toys before the CXOs do. But we also, you know, when we think of a sustainable workforce, I think we have to break out of our common notions of things, right? I think that we're all sort of still inundated with everybody, usually takes an hour to get to work, and they work from 9 to 5, and then at 5 they go back to work. And now with us all being home, our commutes are a little short, but now we're starting to find that the hours are blending into the life part of our lives. And so one is, I think we need to kind of think more about, hey, what is the impact of the work we're trying to do versus, hey, just, clocking in. So what's great is we're starting to see work loses a lot of its boundaries, and that we are less challenged by constraints. And by acknowledging this and making it, just part of the fabric of work, it makes it easier for us to, again, going back to that talent question, to get folks who, for some reason can't move, right? Because, there's people who have disabilities. There are people who have family situations where they have to take care of someone. What's really great is where I work, we don't have clocks, right? For us, it's about the impact of what people do. So I have people who say, wow, my best work happens at 1 a.m. in the morning. And I'm like, go for that, right? And so I think as we kind of get out of that and we use spatial technology to augment this, we're going to find ourselves actually being more productive, but also too probably having much better work-life balance. And then I think the other thing that we just have to think of, especially for managers and leadership, is not forgetting the human aspect for a sustainable workforce. Callie, for example, talked about this a bit earlier. We have to be very careful because a lot of times technology can be used in an unintended way. So this can be things like micromanaging, right? We have these devices that literally can look and see where our eyes are at, right? And someone out there is going, well, I should write an app that makes sure that it says how often people are looking at something else other than their screen, so we can make sure that these folks are being 110% productive. No, that is horrible. And that is something that we absolutely need to call out when we see it. And just things like how long can we wear these devices and things like that. So again, I think if we think of that human aspect and put humans first, we're going to make work a more wonderful thing and not something that we constantly are talking about, burnout and work-life balance.
I'm glad that you brought up the law of unintended consequences and bringing that into the equation, because I think that's really important. So I appreciate that. The next question I want to aim directly at Jeremy and Rob, and it's around cybersecurity. And it continues to be an extremely hot topic, and it's only going to become more important in the future. As the Internet of Things evolves and connected technologies become more vulnerable, spatial computing is deeply rooted in this. If I'm sitting in the C-suite of industry today, what is keeping me up at night, and what do I need to do in order to be prepared for what is coming? And Jeremy, if you could lead that off.
Yeah, sure. So from a more general perspective, as a C-suite member, what I've noticed is that there is a sense of a concentration or a focus on the short term and at the expense of the long-term innovations. So in other words, there's a lot of firefighting that needs to be done in organizations every day, especially now during COVID-19 times when things are not as they always were. You can't sit back into a routine that you've set up and prepared and expect that to be executed beautifully and smoothly. That is, and it's caused this issue whereby it's racking up a lot of innovation debt, for lack of another term. So what's happening is all the investment is being made trying to solve these short-term problems, whereas the long-term innovations and opportunities that could create much more efficient ways of working and competitive advantage, those are being lost day by day, the less focus there is. So the way to tackle that is there's got to be some time allocated, a time-bound period where you can spend some resources, some mind space on thinking about what innovations are there on the horizon, things like spatial computing, but also other where they don't even have to be technological innovations, or they just have to be ways of working that are being discovered that could advantage your company. Because at the end of the day, if you don't take advantage of it, then other competitors will, and that is going to negatively impact your ability to compete as an organization. From another angle to your question, you were mentioning the cybersecurity and Internet of Things aspect. The more stuff that we put online and connect to the internet, the more that we have vulnerable to attack. And when it comes to cybersecurity, it's not a matter of if you're going to be breached nowadays, but when that's going to happen. So the best thing that you can do is expect that breach and prepare accordingly to defend against it in terms of how quickly can I work out when a breach has taken place, and how can I respond to that in terms of rectifying the situation.
So I love that you use the words innovation debt, and it sounds like a great title for your next book. So, Rob, how would you like to take this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when we think of the C-suite overall, I think there's a level of general excitement and acceptance of these technologies. However, the end all or the dream phase and integration of these is still unknown. And I think the reason that it's unknown at that level is because there isn't enough time or there isn't enough leeway for the people that are the dreamers to go out and, hey, and say, hey, this is where we're going, this is where we're going to drive to, and these are the incremental steps to get there. So I think it is really allowing you as an executive to enable those around you to dream of what that experience would be and what that effect on the business is. And then understand, if you have planted a flag in the ground and say, hey, this is where we'd love to be, now start working and looking at what that ROI is. And that's going to be trickled down across the whole business. Once you understand those things, you can start formulating specific groups to deliver these innovative projects and at an MVP state, and look at validation checks throughout that. I think those are the things that are happening now. I think there's just a general acceptance that these things are changing. The world is changing around me, and I need to change with it, or it's going to change faster than I realize. And also, I think there is that hesitation to start. I think there's just an acceptance of these things, but the hesitation to say, yes, we're going to drive to this, we're going to invest the dollars, and we're going to make this a plan and action, and kind of switching the mindset from being, hey, we are a product or service company, but we're also going to be investing in technology that's going to further our product, services, and people that work here. So when we think of cybersecurity, to everyone's point, everyone knows it, that there is going to be breaches. It's not going to happen to you. Do you have the fail safes in check? Have you allowed your architects and engineers to understand how your systems are running and looking at it a holistic viewpoint and putting in those stop gaps at all possible and making sure that it's as secure as it can be? And then what is the disaster planning for when it does happen? How quickly can you get up, and what is that impact to the business? If you have those things ideated and kind of documented, then you're actually taking the first foundational steps to move forward. If you're reacting on the fly, allowing the business to come to you as it comes, you're not really going to ever get ahead of the curve, and you're always going to be looking down and in on the machine versus up and out on the experiences and innovation that could happen.
Great. Thank you, Rob. Appreciate that. So we have 3 or 4 more questions that I want to be able to get through in the next 10 minutes or so. And what I'd like to do is jump down to Callie and talk about what you've got going on. I know that you're in the initial stages of taking your product to market. And as an entrepreneur, can you give our audience a brief overview of what your experience has been like, and what can innovation ecosystems do to better support entrepreneurs like yourself so that you are wildly successful?
Well, we all want to be wildly successful. That is the goal for all of us. And my background, actually, I not come into immersive technology, but one of the ways that I came across it was through my background in developing and running innovation labs, accelerators, and ecosystems like the ones that we're part of here today. And one of the biggest challenges I think that we see in these ecosystems is we have these incredible minds coming together for some great brainstorming, and then there's this cliff. What happens after we have this great meeting of the minds and these great ideas come to the place? The C-suite's excited, frontline workers are excited, everybody's excited about this fun new toy. What now? That's really where innovation can happen. And that's really where there's a lot of opportunity, and something that as an entrepreneur, where there's a lot of ability to create change, but it requires significant collaboration. And we talked about this a lot when defining ROI in spatial computing. It's about really creating very clear goals and KPIs for pilots, for establishing success metrics of a company and an organization, and a dream goal, which Rob, you really just touched on beautifully, of where the vision can go now and in the future. I think that that's really important. And at the core of this is, what is the mindset of the people in a company, your employees, the C-suite, or the end consumer, whether you're playing a game or training for something. And Jennifer, I think you touched on earlier the spatial data that can be captured as a result of just going through an experience, which is incredibly powerful. So we don't realize, because immersive technology, it's so engaging, and you feel like you're there. It doesn't feel like you're going through a training scenario. It doesn't feel like you're in a meeting. You're just experiencing something. And that's it's a novel experience. So you can get much more impact with spatial computing than you can using other technologies. So starting on this low touch point is super impactful. So innovation ecosystems like what NSU is doing, what they can really be helpful for is facilitating pilot opportunities for helping structure and provide access and advice on helping these startups really get off the ground in a very clear, methodical way to measure progress, and getting the right stakeholders to advise on strategic KPIs so that everyone can see success early on. I think that's something that's really important. So what we've really been working on is looking at the internal mindset training that goes beyond just one, how can we affect burnout, things like that. But what does your mindset do to your performance, productivity? We're working with athletes, we're working with frontline healthcare workers. How does that reduce injury time, getting you back, on the field faster? How is that going to improve, compassion fatigue? How is that going to help all these people that don't talk about what's going on for them, or give the C-suite more information about what areas within their organization to improve and innovate when they don't have time to talk to everyone that works for them, because that whole process takes time. We've talked about spatial computing as a physical thing, but we haven't talked about the other component of the physics, which is where space meets time. And that's what we can really accelerate here. And I think that is my closing comment.
So what I take away from that is it's increasing access to the infrastructure, the network, the resources, and hopefully at an accelerated pace. And we look forward to watching your success as you continue to grow. So we greatly appreciate that. We have about 5 minutes left, and I do have a couple of questions that I'd like to speed through. So we'll accelerate our responses on these last couple of questions, because I want to get to a lightning round as we end and put a little challenge in front of all of you. But Rob, specifically, as we talk about the pandemic and how it's changing the world, and it's done so in so many different ways, how are different organizations utilizing spatial computing technology during the pandemic with regards to marketing efforts and ability to attract and maintain customers?
Yeah, so when I think of COVID overall, I think it's really pushed the empathy for people, and the focus has been on that, which has been fantastic for corporations to understand, hey, this is affecting my people, and that person aspect of things is really has become a focal point for a lot of customers. And when we think of spatial computing overall, there's been just an increased acceptance of emerging technologies. We see 60% plus of people enjoy these emerging technology marketing experience, and almost 70% drive to a greater conversion when they go through these experiences. So from the brand perspective, it's driving more brand affinity. You're connecting with people at a deeper level. You're allowing them to be interactive and increase the level of trust and understanding in the products, value propositions, depending on what that is across the market, from retail, like we said, all the way to healthcare. And it's increasing the overall conversions, which is fantastic for the corporations because they're seeing the ROI generating activities. So what that really has done is kind of shrunk the cycle that the customer usually goes through. So if they're experiencing emerging technologies on the front end to drive to a conversion that hopefully is also, feeding into the back end corporations of adaptive augmented reality training situations, that ecosystem in itself will kind of continue to scale very rapidly, which is going to create larger acceptance. And it ties back to a lot of the things we said before, which is ease of use, interactivity, and ultimately being able to instill a level of customer confidence is what we want, or what we've seen from the marketing aspect of things.
So what's interesting is every one of you have each said one word in common, and it's experience. And this is what I love about spatial computing. When I look back at my education, it was great and all, but it was real experiences in life that taught me everything that I know. And I'm looking forward to where this technology is going and how we enhance those experiences. So just in the last couple of minutes that we have left, Thomas and Jeremy, I'm going to put you on the spot with a question. And I'm curious, is there a particular country or a region of the world that's dominating the sector of spatial computing? And does this have any meaning for what's happening in other parts of the world? Thomas, if I could have your response on that.
Yeah, I would say Japan. We have a very small team, but we actually have one of our advocates in Japan focused on the Japan spatial computing community. it may be a characterization, but they're definitely adaptable to new technology. They also are very adaptable to virtual worlds, virtual avatars. We in the West kind of get really wrapped around the axle around the uncanny valley, whereas for them, it's something that's very much accepted. And then just from a very tactical point of view, we have to remember 2 of 5 software developers there are already touching this space. So they've already invested, they're already committed. So absolutely Japan.
Okay, great. Japan it is. Jeremy, do you have something different or something similar?
I'll back up what Thomas is saying and expand on it to include East Asia as a region and include China in that as well. There's some absolutely incredible stuff that's coming out of China. We're not only seeing a grassroots interest from consumers in the technology, as Thomas was talking about, but also a support from government in a very serious way, in that they are actually putting money down on the table to advance this technology and to make sure that it goes further and it goes faster than a lot of other nations are thinking about right now. Many other nations haven't even got immersive technologies on their radar yet, and yet you see governments like China investing in the technology, bolstering startups that are involved in spatial computing, and that's absolutely fantastic. From an economic perspective, we did an analysis on the economic impact of spatial computing, and for China, the model came out as predicting that by 2030, spatial computing technologies, or XR, will contribute $183 billion to the economy over there, which is absolutely incredible.
So I know that we're getting short on time, and as we come to the end, I think it's important to note that spatial computing is just a fascinating topic, and we're literally just scratching the surface of it today. And I'm thinking that this panel is so awesome that we may have to do a phase 2 panel and get in some very specific areas of focus, because there are a lot of questions I certainly didn't get through today, but I think we've done a great 30,000 foot view in terms of global perspective of what's going on. Now, with that said, hopefully you're all ready to go into what I call the lightning round. And in the lightning round, your charge is in 30 seconds or less to give me what your final thoughts are on spatial computing as it relates to what the future looks like. So to put you on the spot, Jennifer, you get to go first.
All right, thank you. Future of spatial computing. I've been looking at it for so long, really excited about hardware becoming mature, networks advancing, and I can't help it, a lot of training in the future to open it up to more and more individuals will bring compelling solutions.
Excellent. Thomas?
I'm very, very bullish on spatial computing, changed my career for it. What I would just say that we need to do is we need to focus on lifting each other up. These AR versus VR and all of that stuff is just nonsensical. We need to be the water that raises all the ships, and not saying that we shouldn't be critical of the work that we're doing, but we gotta stop giving the naysayers the clicks.
All right, nonsensical. I like that word too. I'm going to use that one in the future. Callie?
I would just say, the future of spatial computing is highly personalized and scalable. And I think, like Thomas said, the rising tide lifts all boats. This is the time to collaborate, get creative, and develop real tangible KPIs to make it all happen. This is the time where we're going to see the winners emerge.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. Jeremy?
Spatial computing, despite only being 2 words, is an incredibly complicated spectrum and collaboration and connection of intertwined technologies. And to really understand it, you've got to experience it firsthand, and you've got to continue to experiment with these technologies and really dig deep into it.
Great, thank you. And Rob, you get to close it out.
Yeah, so spatial computing is not going anywhere. It is here to stay, and it's going to impact every single industry and every single vertical, just like we saw computers, just like we saw pagers, just like we saw cell phones, and it's going to happen at scale. So start laying the foundation now for what that looks like in the future, and you'll come out a winner. But we will see winners and losers, and we will see accelerators and laggards within every industry.
Right, and I bet nobody in our audience knew that we were all holograms today, right? All right. So as we wrap up today's virtual panel, it is important for our audience to understand that spatial computing works by understanding the physical world, knowing and communicating our relation to places in that world, and navigating through those places. Spatial computing is changing the world. It has changed our lives and infrastructure, marking a significant shift in how we make our way in the world. Spatial computing is progressing at a fast rate, providing solutions for today and presenting new options that you will have never otherwise considered. And to summarize, the future is already here, and emerging technologies like spatial computing applications will play a significant role in improving how humans, machines, objects, and working environments interact. I can now thank our panelists enough for participating in today's event on spatial computing. Jennifer Shannon from Galvanize, Thomas Lewis from Microsoft, thanks for getting up so early in the morning on the West Coast, Callie Leone from Eunoe, Jeremy Dalton from PwC, and Rob Petrosino from PeakActivity. Thank you for all supporting the global innovation ecosystem, and we welcome you back anytime, and I'm quite serious about doing another panel on this, and at some point hopefully we can do it in person. As we conclude, the Alan B. Levan NSU Broward Center of Innovation will open this summer. In the meantime, we are offering scheduled virtual events, and you can view our calendar by visiting our webpage, nova.edu/innovation, or you can email us at innovation@nova.edu, or you can call our tech hotline, and one of our wonderful operators will be available to talk to you at 954-262-TECH, that's TECH. Don't forget to check us out on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you for joining us today. Stay safe and healthy, and this concludes today's virtual panel. Thank you again, everybody. Greatly appreciated.